So today we're going to finish up this series on life verses, on different passages of Scripture that have impacted me over the years, and clearly we haven't covered all of them, but these are just some of the highlighted ones for me. And today, as we finish up, I want to talk about a few verses that I think are very important for me, but really important for Christendom, because I think we've made some mistakes in Christianity. And one of those is that we've reduced Christianity to a behavior modification system. In other words, that instead of grace and instead of God transforming us from the inside out, we've tried to determine that, well, if I do A, B, C, and D, I can make God love me more. I can make Jesus more proud of me. I can make His love just be permanent if I do enough good stuff. And we have the cart before the horse, if you will, and we have all that backwards. And Jesus addressed this issue in a very powerful way for us in the passage that we're going to look at today. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 22, and you can go ahead and start turning there. And let me see. Let me give you a page number, page 990, if you're looking at the Pew Bible. And the religious leaders of the time were very interested in catching Jesus in saying something that He shouldn't say. And the idea is because He was a threat to them, they kept bringing puzzles to Him. And if they could get Him to answer wrong, then they could convince the people that Jesus was a liar and a hypocrite and somebody who needed to be destroyed or not, at least not followed. And so in the first part of chapter 22, the Sadducees come and present a question about marriage and the resurrection. And they didn't even believe in the resurrection. And Jesus answered them. And one of the things that the religious leaders didn't know and didn't understand is that Jesus was the smartest human being that ever lived. Ever. More so than Socrates or Plato or Aristotle or Einstein. Jesus of Nazareth was the smartest human being that ever lived, and so to stump Him was not possible. So the Sadducees tried, and it didn't work. So the Pharisees come along, and that's where we pick up. Matthew chapter 22, verse 34. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Him with this question: "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now, let me tell you what they're trying to do. If they get Jesus to say that the law of Moses is not that important, if they get Jesus to say that Moses didn't get it right, if they get Jesus to say that Moses was out of his mind, then all of a sudden the Jewish people would refuse to follow Him. And so they were trying to shake up the whole system of everything that Jesus was doing and teaching by getting Him to say that Judaism was bad, right? So that was the trap, and so Jesus didn't fall for it. In fact, He turned to Moses' law itself for the answer. And here's what He said in verse 37. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." And then verse 40, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So Jesus said, and He answered with things that Moses had written. He said, there are two things that you need to know. There are two commandments that you need to follow. And here's what I want us to see in understanding Christianity today. There are two things we are called to do. And if we do those two things, the rest of it will take care of itself. Right? And we're going to talk about how that works. But the first thing is to love God with everything in you. Love God with everything in you. He said, love God with all of your heart. In the Greek mind and the Greek thinking, the heart is the seat of emotions and feelings. And Jesus said, love God with all of your feelings and all of your emotions. And then He said, love God with all of your soul. Your soul is the spiritual part of who you are. It is the part that becomes most intimate with God. It is the part of you that lives on for eternity. Love God to the deepest part of your spiritual being. And then love God with your mind. Your mind are your thoughts. And so what Jesus said is love God with every part of who you are. Now, let me tell you why that answer was important for the Jewish leaders, for the religious leaders, because Jesus was sharing what the Jewish people call the Shema. The Shema is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 6, and it is the key verses for all of Judaism, and particularly for those who strictly hold to Jewish teaching today. And it begins, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, typically is how it's translated. And that Shema is so important that Orthodox Jews the men will take that passage of Scripture in a little box and tie it around their wrist when it's time to worship. And they will put it in another box and tie it around their head when they worship. And then they will take it and they will put it in a box on the doorpost of their home, and they will walk into their home and they will touch it and then kiss it with their hand. To love God with every part of your being is the very reason we exist. And they were reminded of that every single day. Regardless of where they go and what they do or who they interact with, they are to love God with everything about themselves, every part of their being. No matter where they go or what they do or what happens, they are always to love God with every part of their being. And Jesus is telling his followers the same thing. Build your life around God. Make him the most important part of your life in every aspect. Paul said it this way in 2 Corinthians 5:20. He said, we are all ambassadors of Jesus Christ. And an ambassador is someone who represents a country or a country's leader in another country. So if we send an ambassador to Canada, that ambassador represents the United States of America and specifically the President of the United States in interactions with the Canadian government. And so as ambassadors of Jesus, we walk on this earth as members of a different kingdom. And so every place we go, we represent Jesus Christ. Every word that comes out of our mouth, we represent Jesus Christ. Every thought that we have should be centered on Jesus Christ. Our job, our homes, our school, everything about us should be lived in such a way that God is the center of everything. Now, we have a lot of examples today of how this doesn't work. Okay? So I'm going to step into something that I don't often step into. We're going to talk just a second about politics. Okay? I'm going to make it clear, for 14 years I've been here, I've never told you who you should vote for. I will never do that. Okay? So that's not what this is about. Right? And so a little bit of my history, I used to be really involved in politics. All right? I used to go to precinct meetings and determine what the precinct was going to pass on to the next level. And I would go to the next level. I was really into this. And then I began to do some research, and I came to this conclusion that politics, primarily on a national level, is about one thing. It's about power. And if I can do enough to make the other side look bad, then my side will get into power. Now, you can disagree with me, and that's fine, and we can discuss that later. But I came to this conclusion that it wasn't about what was best for the country. It was about how can I win the next election. And it was a matter of, I will become whatever I need to become so that people will vote for me. I will sacrifice my morality. I will sacrifice my integrity. I will sacrifice everything I've ever said so I can have power. Now, I'm sure there are politicians that's not true about them. I'm sure they're there. Okay? So I'm not saying this blankets everybody, but you watch and what happens, and that's the conclusion that I've come to. Now, if that's true, when power is what you're after, the end always justifies the means. All right, so let's bring it a little closer to home. Some people will focus their entire lives around money and careers. And what happens when you do that? You sacrifice your morality, you sacrifice your integrity, you sacrifice everything about who you used to be to reach the objective. That's why Jesus said you can't serve both God and money. They're mutually exclusive. And so on a positive side, when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, he's saying build your life around the spiritual realities of God. And when you do that, it will be amazing what happens in your life. Not that it's necessarily going to be easy. And really what's interesting about what Jesus taught here, it's really simple. It's just not easy to do. But he said, love God with every part of your being. Every time you step into the grocery store, you represent King Jesus. Every time you sit down in a restaurant, you represent King Jesus. Every time you walk into the front door of your home, you represent King Jesus. Every time you drive down the street and that person cuts you off, you represent Jesus. Because you love the Lord your God with everything in you. It would change everything about our lives if we would do that. Now, here's what I want to say, that if we learn to do that, all of the things about the law, all of the rules and regulations, you don't even have to worry about those anymore. I was talking to someone this week, and they were asking me about a particular type of music that they listen to, and they asked me if it was okay if they listened to it. I said, well, it's not okay for me. But I'm not going to tell you it's not okay for you. But here's what I'm going to tell you. You chase after Jesus with everything that you have, and he will make it clear to you. And I said, 5 years from now, you'll be shocked at what's important to you. Because he's going to change everything about you from the inside out. That's what it means to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, and your mind. You make him the center of your universe. It changes everything about you. So Jesus said that's the first command, and if you get that one, guess what? The second one's going to happen automatically. You can't help yourself. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. In Luke's version, he then jumps into the story of the Good Samaritan and tells that story. But love your neighbor as yourself. And so what Jesus is saying now, he says, love God, then love people. And if you love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, guess what? You're going to love people. You can't help yourself. And let me say, as a task-driven person, not a people-driven person, when I am well connected to God, I can't help but love people. Their stories break my heart. They make me cry. I want to help however I can. I want to fix it. Because when I'm loving God with everything in me, I can't help but love people. And that's the result. Love God and love people. Now, there is this issue when you decide to love God and you start loving people that sometimes it may cause a little sacrifice. Did you hear about the man in Orlando that was arrested this past week? 64 years old, retired, and he spends his time taking church members to doctor's appointments. So he pulled up to a 7-Eleven, didn't get out of the car, and the lady that he was taking to her doctor appointment came out of the store, got into his car, and he drove off. Well, it just so happened that 7-Eleven became known as a drug spot where drug things happened, drug exchanges. And so he pulled out of the parking lot. He didn't stop completely at the stop sign. And so they pulled him over, suspecting that maybe he was involved in a drug activity. So they looked in his car and they were talking to him, and there were 4 crystals on the floor. And they said, sir, would you please get out of the car? And he was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I will get out of the car. They took the 4 crystals and they tested them on site, and they came back as meth crystals. And he was like, I have no idea what's going on here. That's not what that is. But they arrested him. He spent 10 hours in jail. He was bonded out. They sent the crystals away. They came back and tested as part of his Krispy Kreme donut. So sometimes we say yes, and we love people, and it gets us into trouble. Yesterday, we had a classic version of this story, and I just got to tell you, everybody that was here yesterday, I was so incredibly proud of you and your response to everything that took place. For those that weren't here, the food truck was supposed to be here at 7 o'clock, and it arrived, I believe, about 9:15. Now, that's bad enough in itself, but the line of people waiting to get food started at the carport, went all the way down the wall, turned down this sidewalk, and went 3/4 of the way back in this building. That's how many people were waiting for food yesterday. And so we waited those 2 hours and plus, and the truck got here, but it was amazing to watch you and to watch the work that you did and the attitude that you have. It was phenomenal. And when it was really hard to love people, not because of the people, but because of the circumstances and the heat and the being late, and we were going to be done 2 hours before this, and could have been really miserable, you showed incredible love. And because you did that, we had about 500, food for 500 people was given away yesterday. So it's really a powerful thing. So thank you for that. But here's what I want us to say. When we choose to follow God, we have to understand there is a cost to it. And the cost is giving up my freedom, giving up my rights. Because when I say yes to make him the center of my world, he may lead me to do things that take up my time on other things. Because we're going to end up loving people in ways that we never have before. I was reminded this week of a story of the 2nd century. There was a plague going throughout the Roman Empire, and they didn't know what it was. And the people were terrified. And in fact, it was so bad, the doctors didn't know what it was, so they fled. We don't know what to do, and we don't want to catch it, so we're out of here. And the only people that stuck around to nurse people were the Christians. And they risked their lives, and they risked everything to care for those who were dying. And it was out of that act of love, that Christendom grew more than it ever had in a very short time. Because when we love, God is using us as his ambassadors to transform the world. So here's what I want to say. Christianity is narrowed down to this. It's not about all the rules and the regulations that you're to follow. It's not about making sure you do A, B, and C right. It's about two things. It's about loving God and loving people. That's it. Again, it's very simple. It's just not necessarily easy. But love God with everything in you and love people. That's what we're called to do. That's the bottom line. And Jesus, the most intelligent man that ever lived, said, listen, just do this. Love God and love people. You've got it. That's what I want you to do. Make that the priority. And the rest of it, he'll transform us from the inside out. I want to share with you a famous quote from Mother Teresa, who worked so hard with the poorest of the poor in India. And she said this. She said, people are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. It's all about him and all about who he wants us to be. Let's pray.